introducing the session now. Dan is as the founder and CEO of Traits Insights, a Melbourne-based sports analytics company building infrastructure for data-driven decision-making across elite sport and beyond, and beyond that. It now operates globally. With a background as a PhD data scientist in professional sport, Dan spent over a decade working in elite football, including roles with Collingwood Football Club in the AFL and Chelsea Football Club in the EPL, where his work focused on talent identification and player development. Dan founded Traits to help organizations better understand and act on complex performance data. Today, the platform is used by professional clubs, federations, and leagues globally, with partners spanning elite sports clients across Cricket Australia, AFL, Premier League, EPL, and more. The company has generated strong early revenue growth and has completed multiple funding rounds to date. So I'll pass it on to Dan to introduce himself a bit more, but yeah, we'll proceed with the session. Please help me welcome Dan.
And thanks everyone for having me today. Really excited to share just a bit. How's that?
I think so, yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Really excited to share a bit about our story and journey at Traits. But then in terms of focus of the session and really what we'll be getting into from more of a theory side of things is actually talking about sales and breaking into new markets and how I've actually been able to build a process into repeatable sales in the first place. So structure for today is largely just sharing a bit about the story and journey to date, what Traits is and how we've got there, but then most of the focus will be on the sales process itself and some of the lessons that we've learnt as an early stage company. And then I'd like to leave a fair bit of time for questions at the end so we can actually just have a discussion around some of the things we've discussed. But off the top, I'll just introduce myself again and Traits more specifically. So I'm Dan and I'm the founder of Traits Insights and have come from that background of working as a data scientist in elite sport for the best part of a decade. Originally, that was at Collingwood Football Club, where I was a shared resource across both the recruitment department and performance analysis department, following the team around live on a match day for the 5 years that I was there. But during the 5 years that I was Collingwood, I also did a PhD in human resource analytics, which is really just a very academic way of saying talent identification through numbers. But the title of that one was Quantifying Draft Value in Prospective AFL Draftees, where what we were doing was taking everything we knew about players at a draft age when they were first eligible for the professional system, and then understanding how that correlated with their performance once in the elite system. But the biggest takeaway from the PhD wasn't all of these projections of future output, it was actually the signal that was being used for the research in the first place, which is what Traits was. And what we're doing with Traits was taking that very complex data and analytics that exists in elite Australian rules football and reducing that down into something very easy that can be understood by coaches, scouts, and most importantly, the players themselves. So I think the best way to describe Traits as a product is really a data translation tool from complex, very PhD level analytics into something that's very easily interpreted by coaches, scouts, and the players. But effectively, it was that work of Traits that I was doing at Collingwood Football Club and through the PhD that then led me to Chelsea Football Club, where when they caught wind of it, they saw it as something very different to what they had in that space, where they had all the bells and whistles from a data science perspective, but hadn't had something that was as cleanly translated into something that could resonate with the coaches and the players. So when they saw it, they said, hey Dan, this looks like some great applications of data science. How would you like to come over here and have a go at doing it with us? To which it didn't take me very long to say, sounds great, where do I sign up? And before I knew it, I was living over in London with this brief of doing Traits in global football, despite not necessarily having a background in the sport. But that was a great place just to understand how Traits could be applied in a different setting around this broader role that I had as well. And really, I had a great time at Chelsea for the 2.5 years that I was there. But what happened is COVID hit, and during COVID, I returned home to Australia due to personal reasons. And after a while, I ended up leaving the role at Chelsea and went from club to club to club, building out this same Traits solution into their internal infrastructure. And that wasn't just in global football, it was a number of different sports and basically doing the same type of approach, but from scratch each time in line with clubs' values and the way that they actually wanted to assess a player. But after having done that a few times over, I really saw the opportunity to take what I was doing, going from one club to the next and building it into the platform that it is today so that we could actually scale and deliver this platform in a much more time and cost-effective way for the clubs. So that was the journey that really kicked off late 2022 it was, so a bit over 3 years ago now, when I launched Traits as a business as opposed to myself working as a consultant, and things have moved very quickly since then. So we launched late 2022, but it was early 2023 that we got our first round of pre-seed funding, and that was from an Aussie VC, and great opportunity to actually just take the vision of what was happening with Traits and actually put that analysis into a genuine MVP with a software platform. But then throughout the course of 2023, what we were able to do was basically prove that there is definitely an appetite for this, working across a number of early clients in elite sport, from Aussie rules to cricket to global football. And that then gave us the traction and validation to go to another round of funding with a VC over in Europe who was able to see what we were doing and say, yes, we can see how this definitely has a fit across the entire industry. So it was at that point there, we basically did another funding round, and it's put in the position to grow the team that we have now. So as of today, there's a team of 11 of us, and that's pretty much a dev team based here in Australia. And then our market is very much global, with clients all around the world in professional football predominantly, but then a number of other sports as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for just how the company has come to be. But what I'll do is I'll just run you through the company and product a little bit up top before we jump into the sales aspect of itself. So at a high level with Traits, what we're looking at first and foremost is that player profiling platform. And the two primary applications for Traits are both talent ID and talent development. The talent ID application is quite obvious when you look at how data is being used in the football or sports industry toward player recruitment. But the less obvious application is the talent development side of things. And ultimately, when we talk about Traits as a talent development solution, it's about being a coaching tool and something that can be player-facing and very intuitive to have coaches talking about quite technical analysis with players and people who don't necessarily come from this background of having degrees in data science or maths or statistics and so on. But the mantra of everything that we're doing at Traits is very much geared around this idea of elevating football expertise. So we really want to stand on the shoulders of the coaches and the experts of the game so that we can listen to the way that they're communicating an athlete's profile so that they can then use that as a coaching tool for themselves, as opposed to being prescriptive on the analysis and saying that this is how you need to measure a football or a basketball or a Aussie rules player. It's giving them the opportunity to actually take their domain knowledge and expertise and wrap it into the platform so that it can speak their language. But at a very high level, that's effectively what Traits is, and we're very much about empowering those experts and knowing where we belong in the industry and serving those football experts or the sports experts as opposed to the data science and analysts who are already very data literate when it comes to their day job, working with those numbers all day, every day. So this gives you a bit of a sense, just at a very, very high level, for the demographic of clientele that we work to. We've got sporting directors and technical directors who are the key demographic of who we ultimately sell to in terms of the budget holders and decision makers within sporting clubs. We've got managers, coaches and scouts who are effectively the ones on the front line using our platform day in, day out with the players themselves. And then we've got analysts and data scientists who are the ones who will actually help co-create this platform in plugging in all the data and making sure that it's as robust and rigorous as it needs to be from a data science perspective. But again, hopefully that frames just a bit of where we exist in the industry and how we actually work alongside some of these practitioners in elite sport. In terms of the approach of Traits and how we actually go about delivering our data science solution, it starts with what we call our Traits framework, where the holy grail of any player profiling is to have an overall rating or number to tell you how well a player is performing. But in order to get there, we need to do a bit of work first, and it starts with Traits, hence the name of the analysis. And what we're doing with Traits is we're basically taking all of this complex data and reducing it into something that reflects the football language used within a club. But we basically do that through this layered framework of working our way from the top down in how we communicate a player's profile with the traits, the metrics within that, and then the raw data. But then we actually build up this profile by taking all of that raw data and measuring each of these different traits, which go into the overall rating. But in terms of the process, it's very collaborative in how we actually go to clubs and say, hey, how would you like to measure a footballer, communicate a footballer, and so on, and then making sure that this becomes their work rather than us being prescriptive on that process. Once we've got that lined up, what we then do is we actually sit down with them and give them the tool and the opportunity to start adjusting and aligning up within each of the different positions within their team as well. So if we're using global football or soccer as an example, you've got centre forwards, fullbacks, midfielders and so on, and we're giving clubs the opportunity to actually say that based on our game model and our framework, this is how we actually want to play with our centre forwards or wingers, acknowledging that the way that one club plays is going to be very different to the next, to the next, to the next. And again, this is where it becomes very applied in making sure that it's their work. And then finally, at the end of the day, what they'll get is this series of ratings, which is, again, across each of those different layers of the analysis, but most importantly, it's their work and it's their version of how they want to measure a footballer. And whether we're looking at a footballer, a basketball, or an Aussie rules player, a cricketer, it doesn't matter. It's the same dashboard. It's the same workflow and integration as to how you can understand what a player's profile is, how they compare to their peers, how they compare across whole leagues, how we track their development, all the different ways that you might want to query and address what player performance looks like. But at the end of the day, it's just something that's quite simple and interpretable, irrespective of your exposure to that advanced data and analytics. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense for just the product itself and where we fit within the elite sports ecosystem. And I would hope that that then helps frame the way in which we sell into this environment as well, because within elite sport, a lot of this work is typically done within the four walls of a football club to date, and we're somewhat unusual coming as a third party and saying, here's all the solution infrastructure for you to go and do it for yourself. But the core of what we've tried to build around this platform is something that's very agile, so that clubs can actually put their IP into it, have ownership over this process, and use that tool and solution as something that they can drive themselves, again, rather than us being prescriptive. But as I come across to just the sales process and that aspect of how we're delivering things at Traits, it's important to acknowledge that at the end of the day, what we're delivering is infrastructure rather than necessarily a silver bullet solution. So when we look at our clientele, I've obviously touched on this a little bit already, but it is quite varied from the number of different sports that we work to. So we've got football as our primary market, or soccer, Australian rules football, rugby, cricket, and even beyond sport, which I'll come back to in a second. But effectively, the clientele that we've got is varied from one sport to the next, but even the demographic of who we work to within sports is quite varied. We've got clubs, leagues, federations, agencies, and even corporates beyond sport. But if we go to the sales side of things now, it's not always been the case of just going into clubs and selling this end-to-end solution, because as I'm sure you'll appreciate from the journey that I've shared up top, we didn't have a product to begin with. So it's always been about building that trust to begin with so that we can actually have the opportunity to solve the problems for clubs and ultimately give us the platform to build out our own platform and the opportunity. And the way in which we've gone about doing that has actually changed as we've evolved and matured as a company as well, from early days being just myself and a consultant going to a club saying, hey, I can build this infrastructure for you, to what it is today, and actually having built that infrastructure and more or less having a software product and a SaaS product to sell now, that we've got a whole team behind building and a whole team delivering into these clubs. So what I wanted to touch on, and really the focus of the session today, is actually talking about some of those different entry points into working with clubs, rather than necessarily just having that end solution or mature product, which we'll get to at the end. But ultimately, we've got a few different ways in which we've been able to approach market entry in a way that gives clubs the trust and opportunity to say, yes, we'd love to do that work with you. But most importantly for us, it gives us a platform and an opportunity to go and deliver that work and develop our own IP. So the three different approaches that I want to touch on almost go in line with the way in which Traits built out over the course of the last 3 years as well. The first one is proof of concepts, the next one is pilots, and the third one is a consortium approach. But with each of them, there's different elements as to why they might be the right fit, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen in that order as well. In terms of being a very early stage company doing proof of concepts, you can go straight to a pilot, and you could theoretically go straight to the consortium as well. But as we've grown out as a company, we've almost gone from starting with proof of concepts with our very early clients to then evolving that to a more advanced pilot to then what it is today, where we've got a more mature product that we can actually go straight into industries and companies within different sectors and say, let's do this as a group approach and a collective rather than individually. But what I'll do now is run you through each one of these in isolation so you can get a sense for the difference between those different approaches. So the first one with the proof of concept is very much in the name, but effectively what you're trying to do is prove that it works in the first place. So we've got 4 pretty clear steps there between design, develop, align, and deliver. And typically we've done this over a 2 to 4 month period. So when we're actually going into clubs or environments for the very first time with our very first few clients, we weren't saying, hey, we're Traits, buy this software platform. We were very upfront and honest in saying, this is the work that we've done in the past. We think there's an opportunity to do this in your environment, and more or less you're asking for them to let you have a go at doing it, because you're not trying to say that you've got this end-to-end solution or positioning yourself as the best version of what it's ever been. You're saying we can help you do this in a way that you haven't been able to do to date. And really it's about building trust in particular in that first proof of concept opportunity, where you're not trying to ask them to come on this long journey with you and be a partner for 6 to 12 months or beyond. You're actually saying we can do work and show value, and let us show you that value relatively quickly, and most importantly in a cost-effective way as well, where you're not asking them to do much more than give you the access to them as stakeholders to prove that you're worth their time and their data and the opportunity that they're giving you. The next approach is a pilot, and this has tended to be how, as we've built a more established product, we've been doing things in terms of rolling it out where you've got much more time, not just to prove your value quickly, but to actually build those relationships over a more extended period of time. And the way that we'll do that is almost the same in terms of the design, develop, deliver, but it's much more grounded around having regular touch points over the course of those 12 months. And the real value in doing a pilot versus the proof of concept is, rather than just asking for the opportunity to add the value, you're almost getting yourself the opportunity to build that relationship over a sustained period of time, so you can keep coming back and adding that value to them, and they trust the way that you work, and ultimately you're setting yourself up for success beyond that 12 months. But in this approach, it's still the same in terms of doing the project design, which is where we actually sit down with them and more or less shape what their traits framework might look like. We integrate their data into the platform. We then start showing them all the different ways in which they can use the platform before it's turned into production and rollout. And when we talk about production from a data science perspective, the difference between what we would consider a pilot versus a proof of concept is a proof of concept would usually be a lighter piece from a data science and data engineering perspective, where you're working off what's more or less a static data set. So we're just going to take some data, show that it works, and then we'll determine whether we go forward. Whereas with the pilot approach, it's actually building something that is more or less automated and something that they continue to use moving forward, or can continue to use moving forward. And then the third approach that's worth touching on is something that we've evolved to as we've got more mature as a company and have more or less positioned ourselves to being somewhat of a thought leader in sports analytics, is this consortium approach. And what we do here is we actually get a group of partners together and shape this collective body of work in how we're actually going to develop a product in a particular market. So rather than saying, hey, we just want to add value with the product, or we want to build that relationship over a longer period of time, we're actually trying to position ourselves as thought leaders of sorts from the outset. So we're going to, not one company, but we're basically saying, look, we've got an opportunity here for 3 different clubs in 3 different geographies to help us break into this new market. And what we want to do is we want to partner with club A, B, and C, because we know that we're going to do the best job of shaping this product for that new sport if we're working as a collective and having multiple people input to that process than if we were to do it on our own or in isolation. And what I think is really good about this approach in particular is that, first of all, it gives us the platform and the opportunity to, again, deliver value, but it really fast tracks our product development in a way that we're not coming here saying that we've got this perfect solution or the best version of what it is, even though we've got a mature platform that we've been developing for 3 years and know that it will add that value. We're still coming with that empathetic mindset of, we're here to learn from you, and we're pricing it in a way that's going to help us support market entry with genuine top tier clubs in breaking into that place where you can then land and expand from there, having a number of very credible reference clients from the outset. So again, from a proof of concept to a pilot to this consortium approach, every one of them is going with the same mentality of, we're not trying to capture value here. The currency that we're looking for is really the opportunity to prove ourselves in the first place. But as you go from the proof of concept to pilot to the consortium approach, each time you're more or less giving yourself more exposure to those relationships, the trusts, and the credibility that you can build off of them.
Do you keep the data inputs going from the beginning till current?
Yeah, good question. When it comes to the data side of things with just everything that we're doing, we work one of 2 ways. It's either us coming with data that we've got access to through third-party providers, or we work with the club's data. But when we look at the platform itself and how it comes together, the real strength of Traits as a platform is that it's working with the data that clubs can use themselves. So we don't own that data or the IP. Our value of the platform is the process itself and the infrastructure that we're building around it. So to answer your question, no, we don't collect their data or we don't share their data with anyone else. We actually let them all share to the extent that they're happy to. This is what we do, but we can have at once German clubs speaking with English clubs, speaking with Italian clubs, saying that this is what it looks like in our environment, and they're happy to share that because they're not giving away their IP or their trade secrets. They're more or less just saying, this is what we find to be effective, and they're set up in this safe and comfortable space where they can actually collaborate with other clubs, and we're not there as Traits trying to tell anyone that this is how they should be doing their job or this is how it should otherwise be done. We're more or less just the facilitator of that knowledge share in the first place. But from our perspective, it becomes a really rich environment for us to iterate and develop a product where, I think it's a cliche in the startup land, but once you've got your first paying customer, no idea is your original idea anymore. It's running with what they're asking for. But in each of the proof of concept to pilot to consortium approaches, what you're doing is really setting up a rich environment to come with good ideas and good challenges to solve in the first place, rather than trying to impose any solution on anyone. So the next one that I want to talk to is really what the established sales process looks like now. So effectively, now that we've got a mature SaaS product and we know we've got product market fit across a number of different markets, this is more or less what the default is for us now. So very different to those market entries with proof of concepts, pilots, and the consortium. But I think this is very much worth acknowledging as well, because whether we're talking about the mature product or these proof of concepts, pilots and consortiums, sales is still the same in terms of the process that you actually need to go through. And what's most important with sales is that it is a process as opposed to something that you're trying to convince people on. When I say process, when I first came out of elite sport and started working on the other side of the desk, so to speak, it very much wasn't natural to me, and to this day it's still not natural in terms of this somewhat discomfort of asking people for money to do what we do. But the more I've spent working with the other salespeople around Traits and just other people in the industry, the more I've learnt that sales isn't about convincing people to do things. It's actually just diagnosing the problems that they already have in the first place and trying to align your solution with it, as opposed to, again, imposing anything on people. So we've got a pretty well-established process in how we go through our sales at Traits now. And what's just really clear and comforting for me when I'm going into any one of these sales calls or business development calls in the industry nowadays is I'm not trying to get the final sale on any one of these calls, or no one on the Traits team is. All you're ever trying to do is just get a green light through to the next stage in this process. And again, you're trying to help and shepherd the clients and the clubs into this value chain of sorts as to how we can understand where we fit within the problems that they've got. And then at the end, if there's alignment, there's an agreement and everyone's happy. And if not, it's almost a good thing that you know that they didn't need it in the first place, or we're not aligned with the approach that we're taking versus what they want. But these are the very clear steps in terms of what selling our SaaS platform looks like into elite sport and any environment for that matter. It's introductory calls and meeting the people within clubs in the first place. It's handing over a trial and saying, once they've said, all right, we would like to use the platform and get a feel for it, we give them the trial. We then check in during the trial before we follow up after the trial, and then we have the decision call and closing. But each one of these different steps actually has very particular things that you're looking for in terms of the signal. None of them until the very end are actually, this is the price and this is what we want to give it to you for, and they're not more or less saying click add to cart until the very end of this process. All you're trying to do at any given stage is actually just getting to that next level. So with introductory call 1, 2, 3, the first point to note is that you should never really go past the introductory call until you feel like you're actually at the right level. I've learned this one the hard way early on, that we're very keen and enthusiastic to put our platform in the hands of people within clubs and whoever was saying, yep, this is great, we'd like to have a look at it. But you can certainly get lost in, let's just say, the wrong pockets of clubs or different decision makers if they don't have that influence to actually buy the platform in the first place. And I think early days I was certainly spending a lot of time talking to people who were giving good feedback, but wasn't necessarily going to ever get us to a point of moving the platform on to becoming a part of their setup. But once you've got to that right level, that's really the whole first process, is whether it takes 1 call, 2 calls, 3 calls, 4 calls, or however long, it's basically work your way to the point where they're saying, yes, we want a trial, and you're at a position of influence already, so that by the time you're putting the trial into the environment, it's making sure that it's going to be connected with the people or all the people in the club that are actually going to have influence over whether or not it can go ahead. Once you get to the trial itself and they've said, yes, we want to use this platform or try it out, it's very important that you don't assume that they remember anything. That's happened so many times where we've had a call with someone earlier in the process, but by the time you actually get to a trial handover, it's almost like they're seeing it again for the first time. And it's very important once you're there at the trial handover and you've got a room full of 2, 3, 4, 5 people, however many, that you're almost starting the process from scratch again, because the most important thing again in the sales process is just making sure that you can diagnose where their pains are and align the trait solution with it, rather than trying to, again, impose a solution on them. So it's important that you don't assume anything at the trial handover stage and pretty much start again from scratch at that point. The great thing about trials and software and SaaS, though, is that the currency that you'll all of a sudden get with a trial is the opportunity to actually check in and follow up a number of times. So again, an opportunity to build that relationship over the number of different conversations. So once you get to the trial check-in stage, that's where we often understand where the value is. So in the introductory calls and the trial handover, you get a good sense for the client or prospect and what it is that they might actually see the value in with Traits. But if there's a value proposition of 5, 6, 7 key points, it's actually aligning which value prop is resonating most based on them actually having used it and getting a feel for where the value is going to be. But once you get to the end of the trial process, usually our trials are probably a couple of weeks on average, sometimes a week, sometimes a little bit more. But at the end of the trial follow-up, it's very important that you're not selling at that point. You're actually just listening and gathering as much feedback as possible because, again, at this point, what's most important is not trying to convince them on the cost or anything. It's very much just about understanding where it's going to add value to them and the impact that you can have. So particularly at the end of a trial, you shouldn't be talking much at all in the meeting. It's just sitting there and listening and gathering that feedback, because what you want to do more than anything is almost have them sell you on why they want the platform and why they want to move ahead with it. That's when it actually turns into probably what most people consider conventional sales at the very end of this whole process, which is actually coming to a decision. And when you're having those discussions, you want to be able to do it with a real understanding of where you're adding value and going to have an impact in their environment. So again, you're not trying to sell them on the costs and what they're getting. You're actually just trying to say, we can help solve these things that you see value in traits from. And then at the very, very end of the process, it's actually, again, conventional sales, but navigating timeframes, budgets, and all these things. But I think if someone were to sit down with me 3 years ago and say, this is what sales is, that would be much more comforting for me than probably what I thought it was day one, which my early impression was all just closing and going on these sales calls from the outset, thinking we've got to make a sell then and there. The currency that matters most early days is, again, the next conversation with the next stakeholder before you get to the trial, before you get to closing. And I think even just breaking it down to those 3 steps, from the early understanding of the landscape to sharing the platform to actually closing a sale, is really important to segregate each of those different things, because if you find yourself selling too early, it's almost like you've skipped a few steps and you're selling yourself short on the opportunity that's in front of you. Yeah.
Do you think it's unique to the product you're selling that everyone's asking about pricing because of the budgets that are available? Because in my experience, I'm asked this point.
Yep.
I'm thinking like the local chief supply chain officer connecting with the CEO and asking me about pricing before we can start piloting.
Yep. Yep, good question. Yes, absolutely have that conversation about pricing, but let them ask is probably the most important thing. Don't try and sell them on the cost if they've not already been sold on the product in the first place. So that pricing question will inevitably come at any point of the discussion, whether it's call 1, 2, 3 during the trial or after the trial, but we almost never try and say, this is our price. They're not in a buying mindset until they're actually asking about price. But that question of what does it cost, whether that's the very first 5 minutes of the first call, the last 5 minutes of the first call, or anything throughout this whole process, is one that you almost want them to come to you with and say, that's them acknowledging they're in a buying mindset. But again, in terms of selling the value of what you're doing and trying to diagnose the problem and align the trait solution to it, we never bring up price proactively unless they ask for it, and that's our invitation, so to speak, to start talking about here's how we can add value, but you've got to more or less earn your way to the right to having that discussion, as opposed to putting price before them before they're in a buying mindset, because then you'll be giving them a reason not to go ahead, or however many thousands of reasons not to go ahead. You want to actually sell them on the product first.
How long does that process take?
Good question. In sport, it can take a very long time. Other times, not so much. But I'd say this process, top to bottom, like as quick as it will ever get for us, is a couple of weeks. In a perfect world where they say, yep, we love this, we want the platform, you give it to them, they say within the first call, we're ready to go. That's not common for record, but that best case scenario for us is 2 to 4 weeks. This process inevitably always takes longer as well, but I'd say on average for us, it's more like 2 to 4 months, and sometimes it can take like well over a year as well, depending on the stakeholders that you're dealing with and how long it takes to go through these different opportunities. But I think it's probably important to note, and this is just my experience having worked in elite sport, who have notoriously slow buying cycles and work to seasonal budgets and all these kind of things. There shouldn't be an expectation on a time frame either. What I've taken great comfort out of in just this process is we've got a pipeline full of hundreds of clubs at any given time, and they all go at their own pace for a number of different reasons, and it's about being diligent so that you can actually follow up with them and be attentive to all these different steps of the process. But there's not a set amount of time that it should ever take or not take, and again, it's about having the empathy of making sure that you can be responsive to them and work around their timeframes rather than trying to impose yours on them.
And is the cost different depending on the outcome of the close?
The cost for us is always determined by the data within the platform in the first place. So when we went from one sport to the next, or big European football clubs to relatively smaller ones, the pricing for us is always determined by ultimately the product that they get at the end of the day, which is variable quite a lot based on the volume and complexity of the data that they've got access to. So that's just our pricing model. But again, this process from a big European football club or a national team to a relatively small one is the difference between big clubs taking 12 months plus sometimes in terms of how long you have to actually work through all these relationships, do the trial, spend a lot of time on that, talking to a lot of people before you get to a long procurement process. Whereas sometimes if you go to other prospects or clients in, say, North America, it's like they're much more, yep, we're convinced we can purchase that a lot quicker. But again, it's about having empathy and understanding of like who you're speaking to, and let's go at a pace that's going to be comfortable for them, and not trying to force anything or, again, sell to them. It's actually letting them more or less sell to you and say, we're ready to have that next conversation.
So you want to proceed at the right level. How do you determine what the internal decision-making process is within your prospects?
Yeah, good question. Early days, that was, again, another one that I was more or less beholden to them in just letting them steer me on so-and-so should see this next, or, yep, this is good. I want to bring it to my boss or this person in that department over there. The longer I've been at this and having really good salespeople and business development people around me, the more there's just a comfort in actually asking those questions more directly. If you're going well on a call and you're speaking to people and you're getting the impression that they're really happy with how things are going, it's being polite about it, but just saying, what would we need to do to progress this from here? And they'll say, you would need to speak to A, B, and C, and they'll be much more forward in giving you timeframes and a direction of travel. And again, it's just waiting for the cues to ask those questions rather than forcing it on them.
I'm just conscious, Dan, is there anything to keep going with their presentation? Then we'll do discussion.
Yep. I think we've got a couple slides left, so
Yeah.
I'll get through those and then maybe we can come back to questions afterward. Key learnings, so we're nearly there. First one is the best currency a client can provide early on is giving you an opportunity and a problem to solve. So I've touched on that one quite a bit already, but I think that's definitely my biggest takeaway and the key point that I'd say to myself when I was first starting out in year one, or any of my colleagues when we were starting year one. The value is in having an opportunity to solve for clients in the first place. So that's something not to take for granted. And I think, like, if we even just talk through this whole presentation, there's all different kinds of currency, whether it's people's time, whether it's access to their boss, whether it's a trial itself and their commitment to having a number of touch points, or the final currency, which is money. But I think the best currency early on is just having a problem to solve and the credibility that comes with being able to prove the value of what you're delivering. The next one is that people want to come on that journey with you, and you don't need to position yourself as the best early on. So I think that's something that we've done particularly well early days, that we never said that we were this best solution because, frankly, we knew that we weren't. We'd only just started out. We had an MVP, and we weren't saying that this is better than all these other solutions out there, but we were very empathetic to the fact that we're building this solution. We'd like you to come on that journey with us. And when you're upfront and honest with people in that way, it's amazing how willing they are to actually come with you on that journey and say, yeah, we'll help you develop and deliver that product. I think that can't be understated in terms of how willing people are to actually support if you're not saying this is the best solution and it's going to cost this much and you're chasing all the value you can up front. If you can be honest with them and say, we want to go from here to here, and even there's not the end solution, that goes a long way. But I think even these days, as much as we're still a startup, but a 3-year-old mature SaaS platform, we're still dealing with clubs today with that consortium approach saying, hey, we're building this new product. Do you want to come with us on that journey? We're not telling them we've got the best thing since sliced bread. The next one is that you're a price taker to begin with. So when I say price taker, I basically mean understand what they've got budget for and try and work within that, rather than saying that we cost this much or we will, because the moment that you put a price on your head in particular, you're setting expectations and you've got to deliver to those expectations. And that doesn't mean do work for free, or it doesn't mean do work really cheaply all the time, but it means do something that they're going to be comfortable with so that you can exceed their expectations. Because as you're going from a proof of concept or a pilot in particular, the opportunity for the next step is almost always directly linked to leaving a better impression than what they thought they were going to get out of it in the first place. So in that sense, taking whatever price they're comfortable paying is going to be a lot better than you putting your own price on yourself. Because again, I think that's something that's earned further down the track as you build a platform that you know has that value, and it's more or less a default offering, as opposed to the early stages of we're just trying to prove our value and get an opportunity here in the first place. Appreciate that's easier said than done when there's only so much time in the day, and everyone's got to live and eat as well in the first place. But I think it's just having a healthy balance of understanding that the currency that they're giving you first and foremost is the opportunity, as opposed to what you've built when you're still building, and being very upfront with that this is not an end product yet, and that the ask from them is their time and their commitment to the project, as opposed to the financial aspect. The next one is that trust and credibility go a long way in earning bigger opportunities. So again, that comes back to just the execution side of things. But when people trust what you're doing, which is ultimately earned through executing in the first place, that definitely unlocks those big opportunities. So many of the bigger clubs we've gone on to work with, or leagues, or just our bigger opportunities, have almost always been directly fed through having worked with other reference clients that are somewhat further down the pyramid. And the great thing about that is, again, it's the opportunity to build those relationships. But just in my experience, having worked in professional sport, it's a very transient industry and people are always moving around as well. But the reputation that you leave in doing your proof of concepts, pilots, consortiums will very much follow with the company and the brand of what Traits means to people as you exceed their expectations as you're going. So I think that can't be understated as well in terms of just the value of doing good work for people, and that work doesn't have to be the best work that they've ever seen, but if they thought they were going to get a relatively cheap proof of concept and you've delivered something much greater than that for them, that's where the reputation starts to flow. And touching on the same point again here, but exceeding expectations is the most reliable way to repeatable opportunities. And when we talk about repeatable opportunities, it's, again, we're not just having this client for this time, it's ultimately about renewals and being able to repeat the same process, knowing that you've delivered for one club. The currency that you get through the clients that you're working with at a mature product and more or less at default pricing is building a brand and building a reputation that others will follow. And the thing that comes with that is just case studies. And again, when we talk about the whole sales process, we're not selling features and benefits, we're selling case studies and stories. And this is how other clubs have used Traits, the same way that you're explaining all your challenges or pains to us now. What we're doing with Traits and the way that our business development and sales is just getting better and better and better with time is, let us tell you this story, this story, this story, this story, that other clubs have had that same solution. So the longer we've been at this for, the less it's about features and benefits and much more just, we recognise that pain, we've dealt with it before, and here's why. And it becomes much more of a storytelling process than a product discussion in the first place. Last one, I think I've touched on this one already as well. Sales isn't about convincing, it's about diagnosing and aligning. I don't think I need to talk to that too much more. It's pretty much the theme of everything that we've discussed. But again, I take great comfort out of what sales kind of means to Traits these days, about working through that process as opposed to asking people for money and trying to say that this is what it costs. It's earning your right to have that discussion with them through building a relationship in the first place. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We've got a few questions. Just please wait for the mic so we can record it and so everyone can hear the question.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. I've learned a lot. I guess my question might not be as complex as the others. Just a very simple question in terms of the introductory call, 1,
Yep.
2, 3. How do you get to convince maybe the clubs to sit with you in the
Yeah.
same room? I know, like you've had experience working with Collingwood, and then you could build up on that experience.
Yep.
But then the struggle that I'm having is just how do I go with a cold call?
Yeah.
I know it might not be really like a question of within the context of what you've discussed.
Yeah.
But just still a question that I have. Just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, very, very good question. Lead generation is probably 0.0 up the top here before the actual sales process. But lead generation is one that, again, I think you need to earn your right in some respects to actually have a sales conversation with people. And so many lead gen conversations I had, particularly early days before people knew what Traits was, and it was in a website and is the platform that has reference clients and everything now was actually just asking them for a chat about football, or you work in basketball, can we have a chat about basketball? I want to understand the landscape, and reaching out to people, just have a conversation without an agenda of selling a platform. And I think much like that point before, when they start asking for pricing, then it's your invitation to share pricing. It was almost like early days, it was like, I just want to have a chat about football with people, understand their landscape, and then there's almost always a hook that will invite them into having a traits conversation. And do you want to see what I'm doing now? Or the guys that are doing lead gen for us now and business development, they're reaching out to people all around the world saying, hey, I want to have a conversation about football, and genuinely just want to talk football with them. And if the conversation opens up to having a traits conversation, great. And if not, sometimes it's just like, great to chat, understand the landscape, learn the landscape, and move on. So I think the answer to that is it's not easy to necessarily just generate an abundance of leads in any given circumstances, but it's certainly easier to have a conversation around their domain and their experience and your experience, and there's probably a reason you're doing what you're doing in the first place and having a solution for them. But I think rather than leading with the solution, saying, hey, I want to pitch this to you, so I want to have a conversation and let them ask for the pitch almost in some respects, or when they are curious, you can lead them into that. And I think, particularly again, early days, it was almost like I felt like I had to earn the right to have a sales call or a pitch call to them, and that starts with building a relationship, and then you have a second call as a pitch, or you're almost going into these calls knowing that you're having a conversation for the first half and it might turn into a pitch if you're lucky. But I felt like I almost needed to earn the right to pitch to them, as opposed to thinking that was something I could just open with, because again, I probably learnt the longer way of just, if you're reaching out to people saying, hey, I'd like to show you my solution, response rates are very low, and even when you get them on those calls, they're somewhat disengaged already versus what they would otherwise be, because they don't know much about the value or the knowledge that you can bring to their environment in the first place. So again, coming with an understanding of just, I'm here to listen to you rather than here's what I've got to tell you, is probably the thing that set us up for success, and what our business development team does really well now, that it's not us going out to every sporting club in the world saying we've got this solution. It's, hey, we want to learn about your sport, we want to learn about your geography, we want to learn about your market, we want to learn about your set of circumstances, and leading with that, and then getting invited into having that next conversation rather than starting with that.
So then it almost sounds like you're not always just connecting for sales, you're connecting to really connect and have relationships, and then sales might be the next step. But it's more about understanding them, their market, their problems.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was literally having a conversation with one of our sales guys just a couple of days ago, and he was saying, I've got the best job in the world because I'm getting paid for what I would love to do in the spare time that I never had in my previous role anyway, but I'm getting paid just to connect with people. And he trusts and believes in traits as a solution and loves bringing that into the conversation as well. But it's like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I'm not going to impose it on them. But yeah, for every conversation that we have, we find the success rate and how we actually get to the right people in the right room and everything is far greater if you just come in with we want to listen and learn and share what we know, rather than lead with the platform. But once you start inevitably getting to the platform, they're doing it with a really curious mind.
Just wanted to ask about your price taking comment again, because I can imagine that pricing would get asked by the clients fairly early on in the piece as well. And I know, being a price taker, you've got a few different options to have that discussion. Is it pay what you feel? Do you put a nominal price out there with the clients and then cut that down to a number that they're comfortable with?
Yep.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I say the price taking piece, that's again much more linked to early stage proof of concepts pilots, as opposed to the more complete solution. But probably similar to my response to you before, it's actually just having the cues to then ask the question of, hey, is there a price that works for you guys that is under a certain threshold that means we don't need formal sign-off to have to go through a full procurement process? That's a question we've started to get very comfortable asking. And when people say, well, what is pricing? You can say, oh, well, in the past we've done it with environment A, B, C, and D, and that costs 5 there, 10 there, 12 there, and 2 there. But you're not trying to tell them this is the price. You are just saying, look, is there a number that fits within your budget? That means you don't have to go through a full procurement process and it has to get done into their budget for the next 12 months, but more, this is something that we have not necessarily as loose change, but it's something that we're able to commit in a way that's not coming at a huge cost for them, whatever that looks like in their setting. But again, if the proof of concept and pilot in particular is all about exceeding expectations and being able to come in and add value, you actually want to set your bar sufficiently low in that sense on being able to exceed those expectations in the first place. And I don't think I'll go into this today from a capital perspective, but I actually see capital almost the exact same way as well. If you start pushing on valuation and setting your bar too high, you're actually setting yourself up for failure. It's doing something that they feel like they're getting a good opportunity, you feel like you're getting a good opportunity, and everyone's happy when it goes better than what they expected. Yep.
Hi, just a further question. Where would agentic AI be best fit into the model or the solution offering to your sporting client?
Yeah, good question.
I'd like to explore that and understand that with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think you're probably going to take me off on a little tangent here, but when we talk about agentic AI and all the benefits of what it can do in streamlining processes, I think everything that I've shared here today when it comes to sales feels like it's a very human process in terms of building relationships, understanding where the value is and how we can actually, again, bring people on a journey to want to have those conversations. So something like AI in our world, that's like, there's a lot from a product sense that we'll use it for and do use it for. But I think particularly from a sales perspective, we actually don't use it much at all. And if we were using it for a sales perspective, it would only be to help us do the background thinking and research on who we might be reaching out to, as opposed to doing that for us. Because the moment that you start getting AI or a computer to do that work for you, you're losing that human touch and authenticity in the first place. But I'm sure it's horses for courses in terms of the actual business that you've got in the business model, whether it's B2C or B2B. But in a enterprise B2B space, for us, the relationships are everything, and building their trust is everything. So we've not looked to fast track that process, knowing that it's been a successful approach for us to date. And again, the human element's much more important than a mass approach.
Yes, thank you for the
Thank you.
No worries.
Hey, hi. First of all, congratulations on the presentation. I found it like very open, very transparent, and I really appreciated that. Then I had a two-part questions regarding the trial period.
Yep.
You mentioned it lasts 1 week, and probably it takes like some time to set up as well. So that seems like a very short amount of time. So my question is like, what is the value? What are they seeing in such such a short amount of time for them to be convinced? Because I'm guessing like long-lasting change might take like some more time to happen.
Yep.
And then the second part of the question is like, again, I used to work in education, and also purchasing cycles are very slow. So how do you keep your leads, let's say, warm, considering like from the time you did your trial, it might take some more weeks to months for them for you to close them.
Yep.
So how do you keep them warm?
Yeah, great questions, both of them. So the first one, like, we're fortunate with a mature platform that deployment is very quick. Traits dev team sitting just behind you, and they've done an exceptional job of basically switching the platform on in a matter of minutes. If we want to, you can do it live then and there on a call. So yeah, that aspect of things has more or less been automated. And showing the value is something that they'll see in these pitch calls anyway. The trial handover, again, we said that less as features and benefits and more about the opportunity to build a relationship. So you're actually just sitting by people on these calls, more or less guiding them through some of their workflows. We want to look at this player, we want to compare them to this player, we want to track all these different user flows, but it's just there to actually support what they're doing in the first place. But I think that, again, is probably more reflective of the product that we've built than necessarily the sales process itself, because we pride ourselves on the product being intuitive and simple and easy to navigate, so it doesn't require too much selling from a feature benefit perspective. But then to the second part of your question, that is just the challenge. I feel like, particularly in elite sport, I feel that all the time, but I'm sure it's the same in just about every other industry. From people saying, yes, we want to go ahead with this, or yes, we really like this, but we've got to wait X many months till our budget cycle. Keeping them warm is just it is a challenge. But that's where, again, it kind of comes back to product on having a pretty steady flow of updates that we can use as a catalyst to actually just keep that conversation going. So again, with a great dev team, there's probably something being shipped every month, but using that as a touch point to say, hey, I've got this new feature for you, it'd be good for you to check that out, or saying, hey, we'll give you access to a trial again for another week to check this out, or share it with this new person who's just come into the organisation. There's lots of different sort of tips and tricks to keep that warm, but that is probably one of our biggest challenges, almost particularly this time of the year. It's like in football, a lot of the budget cycles work 1 July to 1 July, and we've got a lot of clubs that have said yes for 1 July, but for the next 3 months, it's keeping them there until they actually start. Yep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights, and I really like the sales process. I just wanted to ask you if you had any challenges or lessons learned you want to share, because obviously you're selling a product that is trying to enhance like a club's performance, and it's not like there's any compliance or anything like that driving that particular sale, as in it's just to do with an internal drive. And obviously in the early stages, is there a way for you to navigate like not undermining that organization's performance, or not undermining their data scientists or their coaches? You know, is there any things that you've learned along the way? Some things not to say?
Lots. Again, I think it comes back to being very transparent and human with them in terms of understanding where their pains are and trying to diagnose and align to those. What a head of recruitment wants versus what a sporting director wants versus what a coach wants versus what an analyst wants are all very different things. And you almost need to be able to have that conversation with each of them in isolation to help them see the value in how traits can solve their problems, because what might be solving one person's problem is actually going to be taking some of the responsibility or agency of someone else's role away from them a little bit. So it's about making sure that, again, you can align it with each of the different stakeholders, ideally in isolation. That's probably one thing that we've found important, that you can speak to coaches as coaches, analysts as analysts, and decision makers as decision makers. But I think in our world, and probably many data science stats platforms, it is often the analysts are the ones that can be the trickiest hurdle to navigate, just because that's their responsibility at the moment, and they have such strong agency over how that space works within the environment. So for us, it's really important with them that we're not saying we're here to replace anything that you're doing. It's actually saying here's a tool and infrastructure that's going to aid what you're doing. And again, that's a conversation that's very easy for them to have when you can sit down there and show them the rigor of what's behind it and how it's complementary to what they're doing rather than replacing it. But then when you're speaking with a coach, it's a very different conversation, because you're saying you can do this work independent of the analyst being by your side, but you need to help educate them why that's beneficial for them, but also beneficial to the analysts as well. So I think, again, just knowing the different personality types and stakeholder groups that you've got's probably been the key thing to navigate, and it's still not easy today to be able to just work through all these different groups, because some of them naturally just come with their guard up or with a skeptical outlook because of others that have gone before you or their current politics or standing within their environment. But I think that, again, the most important thing is just going in and coming in with a mindset that's not, we're trying to impose this on you, or your boss said this or the coach said that. It's just going in and saying, hey, want to understand about your role, want to understand where the challenges are, and again, aligning traits to help address their challenges, where you can have a very different value prop to an analyst or a data scientist in the same club that you've got a completely different value prop to the coach. But at the end of the day, if they're both saying we want this solution for different reasons, that's fine. Ideal, in fact.
Thank you. Take one more question, maybe two more.
Hello, hi, how are you? First, thanks for the presentation. It was very nice and actually very specific. Couple of questions. You didn't mention anything about your pricing. I feel like because you're working with big clubs, your pricing may be high, like it is specific niche product. You're working with Chelsea, for instance, they're gonna pay thousands of dollars every year, maybe $100,000 to $200,000 a year for this product. But in the same process, working for a small product, maybe you have a subscription, $100 a month. It is gonna be different tweak here. Like you're spending all this time with a client, you're making all these relationships, all these events you attend, because you're chasing a customer paying actually maybe $500,000 a year. Yeah. But for small products, how this process will be tweaked?
Yeah, good question. So again, like this is our process for our business at the moment. And even where Traits is positioned at the moment in the broader ecosystem, I'd consider us B2B SaaS, that we definitely have a price floor that we don't go beneath nowadays as well. And that's just making sure that from our business development efforts, we're still going after clubs that we know are going to, or clients and prospects that are going to be able to make it worth our time as well if we're going to be having 5, 6, 7 calls as we're going through it. But that doesn't mean that we won't go to smaller clubs. It's just the process that we've got for those clubs is different. And to be honest, we've really kind of kept ourselves out of that market for now as something that we can go down further along the lines once we've got a more mature product that doesn't require the same amount of selling, so to speak. But all that said, in the smaller clubs or as you get further down the pyramid, there are less stakeholders to navigate as well. So there's kind of pros and cons to either side, but we've been very intentional with how we've grown out our business in going from the top of the sporting pyramid and working our way down rather than the other way around. Because again, with that credibility of working with some of these top clubs, it's a long, slow process of building those relationships and trust and executing. But as you get there, that's what starts to open up so many more of these conversations. And I'm not sure if you've seen anything about Traits online or in coming into this session or anything, but we've got a very lean digital footprint very intentionally because at the moment, all our business development is geared around building relationships with people that we trust in those environments. And then as we've built those relationships, we're very happy for them to tell the world about how Traits has been going and how they trust it and believe in it. But we've been very considered in not basically saying, let's do this for everyone up front or plastering the logos of all the clubs and teams that we work to up front. It's very much about building relationships and letting that do the work for us. And as we start to scale down to different levels of the football pyramid, the approach will probably change a little bit. But I think for us, it's very much geared around that B2B SaaS model. So we do have a pricing floor, which we are strict in keeping to, except for when we're doing proof of concepts and pilots in the consortium, which is much more, we want to exceed their expectations anyway.
Yeah. Hi, Olivia. Sujit here. First of all, thank you so much for all the insights. I'm not a salesperson myself, but now I feel a bit more confident in doing some of these things. My question is specifically about lead generation, what happens before introductory call. So essentially you have several ways of doing outreach, cold emails, cold calls, and even showing up at the doorstep.
Yeah.
Is there a recommended approach that you have based on your experience, or there's a sequence that we need to follow in order to get there?
Yeah, good question. Lots of different approaches to lead gen. There's not one way to do it. I think if you only depend on one way, you're probably not spreading yourself in enough different areas. But like early days for myself, there was a strong element of who's in your network. There's a strong element of cold outreach to people, but very intentional. It's not a copy-paste job on LinkedIn. It's hi person from this sport, this geography, and this profile club who's got this background. I'd love to have a conversation with you about X, Y, and Z. And again, you're going with the mentality of I just genuinely want to learn, because if the worst case thing out of this call is that I just learned a whole bunch about a second division Austrian team, that's great. But it's, again, being personable to the extent that you can in a cold message saying, hey, not buy my platform and here's all the features and benefits and here's a flyer. It's, I want to have a conversation with you about something that you're well placed to have a conversation about, with enough of a hook on yourself to say, in that case, I've worked at this club and would love to have a conversation and pick your brains on this. That's definitely the one that I led with early days. But then I think as our team's matured and the people that we've hired has probably been the key to just generating leads in a relatively small market of elite sport. It's having the right people that can do that with authenticity as well. And it's, I think one of the best things, that bits of advice that was just like a gold nugget when I heard it from one of our board members early days was the reason that one of the big industry players has got to the success that it does now early on was because I think the quote was, had people like me selling to people like me. So rather than trying to put yourself in a room of people that you're not familiar or uncomfortable with, which again, I'm not familiar with all these different other sports that we work into, it's getting people from those environments who can do it, but not just know that language and know those worlds, but belong with those decision makers as well and being some of them. But basically, we've always made a really considered effort to make sure that the people that are doing business development on Traits' behalf are fluent in the language of those different cultures and environments and sports, so much so that they actually have something to share with them in any conversation, rather than, again, just trying to come with a software platform and have that conversation. We want to have a conversation and lead with that first, and then if it goes toward Traits, great. But I think the best reflection of that as well, even within our team, is two of our business development guys these days were two of our first clients. and they've been there. We've built that relationship with them all along, and nowadays we're in a fortunate position to actually have them as part of our team. But it's having people like them selling to people like them rather than, again, anyone else. Yeah.
Thank you. One last round of applause to Dan. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you to the team in the back also. Thanks for coming in today. This really wraps up our session. If you have any pressing questions, come up, connect with Dan, ask your question in person. Otherwise, I think we might run just some conversations after this lunch and learn between 1:45 and 2 p.m. So if you'd like to stick back, we'll do it at the front tables just there. It's tables just to get together, express some challenges we're experiencing and how we can potentially support each other in specific to customer acquisition and sales strategy. So if you'd like to do that, we'll do it between 1:45 and 2 p.m. But that really wraps up the session. There's a number of QR codes on the tables everywhere. Please scan the QR codes, give us your feedback about the session. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming in today. Thanks.